What's going on, guys? Welcome to In the Zone. I'm your host, Garrison Roy. We have a very special guest in person with us today. But before we get into it, obviously, if you have any questions, topics, or guest suggestions, you can hit us up in the DMs or in the email inbox, in the zone podcast 123@gmail.com. Obviously, today will be a full-length interview, and then we'll also have mental minutes to kind of help with mental game hacks, and then also deep dive educational explorations to get into more intricacies of either the game or training or anything else of that matter, and then also rants. But yeah, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get this thing rolling. One of the first in-person podcasts, face-to-face versus having it screen-to-screen via Zoom. So looking forward to it. We have Lucas Mullins, a body tempering specialist for the BTC. Did I
Yep.
say that right?
That's it. That's it.
Cool. Awesome. Well, Lucas, kind of give us a little bit of background on what that is and how that's, I guess, different than, some of the other certifications or like a sports massage or, things like that.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So body tempering started back in 2014. It's actually a pretty funny story in terms of how it started. There was this old powerlifter named Donnie Thompson. He's broken all sorts of, world records. He was the first lifter to ever total 3,000 in a meet, which is pretty stacked.
Yeah.
They were training in their gym one day, and they had this big piece of steel. It was like 130 pounds, and they would always do like myofascial work over their abs and stuff to prepare them for training.
Sure.
And they had this random idea one day of like, hey, what if we use this to work on ourselves? Like, what if we use this larger piece to get ourselves healthy? And they tried it, and it was just a complete game changer. So they threw it into their training, and they were like, well, what if we did this on our back? What about our calves? What about our shoulders?
Yeah.
And it became like
Full experimental.
yeah, it became their secret. And they had some NFL players training in their gym with them, so they got to kind of spread it out. So the word spread to the NFL, and it kind of grew out. But basically, it's grown into this thing, and the whole idea is how can we take like heavy loaded pressure, how can we get it passive on a muscle, and how can we create the release that we need through that? And the results are absolutely amazing.
Oh, yeah.
The efficiency of it is wild.
100%. And I'm sure it's, like you said, more efficient, probably a lot more time efficient compared to like a Theragun or
Completely.
even like manually trying to go in and
It
do it,
is.
right?
It
Like,
is, especially for athletes, because I mean, when you're looking at like high level, like golf, tennis, like even football, baseball, like those guys they're performing at such a high level, like their muscles are so chronically tight. Like there's
oh,
not
yeah.
much that physical therapists can do a lot of times to get that tissue to loosen up. And when you can knock it out in 10 minutes or 15 minutes, I mean that changes the life of an athlete.
Oh, absolutely. Well, even just, for that day too, like sometimes, muscles, I guess we talk about like my fascial adhesions or things like that, where they get basically like these little knots,
They get balled
right?
up
Yeah, exactly.
100%.
Kind of talk
100%.
about what's the process of how that even happens? Is that just overuse? Is that,
Yeah.
based on training or, how does that work?
100%. So the muscle, the way that it works, there's all sorts of small chemical reactions that are happening every time that there's a contraction. So every time we have that contraction happen, there's a product of that contraction, and the result is waste. So we get lactic acid buildup, we get glycogen buildup, we get all kinds of stuff that builds up in the muscle. And as a result, it gets what's called hypertonic over time. And that hypertonicity is there's too much waste and there's not enough good stuff flowing in. So it
Yeah.
gets backed up. As a result, the brain sends a signal in, and it tells the body to tighten up that muscle to protect it. We call that sympathetic activity. And as a result, it gets tight over time. The mobility decreases, and all of a sudden, you can't straighten your arm out like you used to, or you're going to sprint and you can't extend your hip like you used to. Well, what the tempering does is it's going to get into that tissue, and it's going to push all of that waste product out, and it's going to decrease that sympathetic activity as well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's kind of like that fight or flight mode, right? The parasympathetic versus sympathetic nervous system.
100%. And we don't realize how greatly that affects us. Like we live in these, we've got this social media world, this,
Oh,
this email world, and we're all in these tight positions, and we stay that way all the time, and we don't realize how much it's affecting our performance on the field, on the court, all of that.
absolutely. Well, if you can move better and actually, rest whenever you need to be parasympathetic or be
Correct.
excited at the right times, it's gonna tremendously change everything, right? Not even just performance, really your quality of life too.
Yeah,
Right.
so true, so true. I mean, if you're going to get on the field and you can't, process your thoughts correctly. Like that's coming down to that sympathetic activity. If you can't get yourself calm enough to get into that state and
Mhm.
perform, then it doesn't matter how good you are at swinging the bat, like you're not going to be able to get there.
Oh, 100%. I've actually done several things and prescribed this for some athletes where it was just general breathing exercises, but just throw a kettlebell on the stomach,
Oh,
right?
that's really cool.
And kind of get guys to engage their diaphragm a little bit more,
That's
a
perfect.
little bit more mindful of their breathing, right? Because they're like, oh, they're freaking out because I have this thing on my belly, right? But they have to have some type of tension there.
Uh-huh.
And then,
Sure.
yeah,
That's smart. I like that a lot. It's really cool. It's like they've done studies and they've looked at tempering specifically, but they've looked at why does it actually create that like parasympathetic
yeah,
activity? Like why does it? And I think it goes back to like everybody has this like desire for that like pressure to like push into their body. Like it changes like how your brain functions. Like it's almost like when you're a small child and like your caregiver like puts a hand on your stomach, like it creates this calming response. And it's so powerful in terms of how that helps us even in performance. We don't even think about the
yeah.
connection there. But
No, that makes total sense too. Do you think that part of it, in a way, like when you have the heavy implement on, does your body also kind of go into like an isometric contraction too to
it
also,
it wants to. It
yeah.
wants to. So like that's the natural response whenever somebody puts the weight on you. But if you can coach yourself, and obviously the practitioner that you're working with is
Mhm.
going to help to coach you through, proper breathing exercises to get yourself relaxed. But yeah, of course, whenever you're putting that much weight on somebody, then naturally you're going to get that
A
that
little tense.
contraction.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, because our bodies don't understand that 100+ pounds of weight on our back or hamstrings is good for us. We kind of
Yeah.
have to tell it that.
Yeah. Well, and you're, like you said earlier, you're trying to get some of those bad fluids out, and
Correct.
the newer blood cells, or just anything
Yeah,
to kind of refresh it, recycle
exactly.
it basically.
Exactly.
What
Exactly.
what would you say for someone who may be like even more hypersensitive, like they can't even, like they're sensitive to the touch really, and they can't
Hmm.
even get a body tempering? Like,
Yeah.
how does that
Yeah.
affect them, and where would they start with
Yeah.
this process?
So typically when you see people that their nervous system is so, is so over aroused, hyper aroused, they typically are going to need to go through some sort of process, whether that's coaching them through breathing or whether that's, having them deal with whatever they're going through. Sometimes it's even life situations that they need
Sure.
to go through in order to get themselves calm enough. But I also recommend people starting with their own self therapies like foam rolling, lacrosse ball work. That way they can process through that tightness a little bit before they step into something as intense as body tempering. Massage therapy is also a fantastic way. Massage therapy works very similar to body tempering. It's just not as heavy, it's not as constant. So the
Mhm.
progress happens a little bit slower, but it's a fantastic modality.
Oh, absolutely. And then I'm thinking of one athlete in particular that,
Yeah.
for right now, like literally any type of sensitive touch or even like a Theragun is just like
Just throws them
yeah.
off.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's
Uh-huh.
that's a problem,
Yeah, it is. It is. But like I said, like we get into such sympathetic states that we become completely locked. And especially for athletes too, because we're told to perform, perform,
Hmm.
perform. And that performance is crucial. But if we don't know how to turn off, we can't turn on properly. Like the light's going to burn out eventually. And that's when we get to those positions
Physical
where
burnout and probably mental burnout too. I'm sure that kind
massive.
of probably coincides. I've seen that
Hmm.
actually with a lot of guys training wise, or even just how they perform in their sport.
Hmm.
Their mental state does kind of almost parallel with what's going on physically with their body. Like if they're very spastic or very,
Yeah.
just kind of almost thinking too much or all over the place, like their performance is also all over the
Also all
place.
over the place.
Yeah, yeah. Or,
Totally.
vice versa. Like if they're relaxed, they're loose.
Yep.
That's the same way how they play. They go about it and they're
Hmm.
nice, smooth and easy,
Yep.
free flowing. There's no rigidity to their movement patterns, right? Like
Hmm.
it's actually really cool to kind of see that. And it reminds me a lot of a YouTube video. It's like an hour long. And I'm
Yep.
sure you may have seen this, and
Okay.
it'll kind of maybe spark some things here. I'll put it in the show notes for you guys too. But it's about how water has memory in a way, right? And again, it's a little out there. Can you really claim that? Not really, but like,
Nothing wrong with that.
yeah, if you have like a certain emotion, like that just spoken to a glass of water, it changes the molecular portion of that water.
No way.
So same thing with like thoughts or emotions, things like that. Like if you're really down on yourself, or you see someone who has really bad body language, something,
Yeah.
for example, right?
Yeah.
Like that molecular level, it's going to be carried in a certain way to
Wow.
where it's going to be, too
Wow. Yeah.
compressed
Yeah.
or in
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Your body's
overly
going to
excited.
express it in some way. I didn't know that actually, but that's really neat. I do think that like our internal environment is going to reflect itself in our external environment, and that definitely applies to performance. So that makes perfect sense. I mean,
Yeah.
you can see that in every walk of life, I think.
Oh, 100%. And I see it countless times too. People, I mean, some people experience maybe in yoga or in their own self-myofascial release, or like LDOAs, for example. Some people have like emotional responses because of some of the things that have been built up in some of those
Yep.
adhesions. Once it gets released,
It's
the water is still there, like
Uh-huh.
all that tension's still there from
Yeah.
where it started. And then you're just like, whoa, what just happened? Right. Like,
Okay.
and
Okay.
that's where some of these almost kind of, people just say, "Oh, I had an experience," or like, some type of thing with this,
Uh-huh.
and they get emotionally attached to it because of what kind of relief it actually
So
got them.
cool. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I've had that experience before on myself.
Really?
I had an old coach, yeah, that did like a very deep manual psoas release, and his hands were strong enough that it was basically body tempering
Yeah.
because he was like this 800-pound deadlifter. Like, dude was a beast, but he
Just
didn't.
put his elbow in your head
I
too.
know he should have. Yeah, no, but he did like a deep release, and like it was painful. Like, don't get me wrong, but like I was okay.
Yeah.
And we finished up, and I was like, okay, cool. And I stood up, and then about 2 minutes later, it was just a ripper.
Tears.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then he walked over. He's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I thought so."
Yeah. It's like, I'm good,
And
but
it was
like
like, yeah, it
those
was
emotion hits.
uncontrollable sobbing. But yeah, but that goes to show, like, we hold that internal tension in our tissues as
Yeah.
well, and that has a huge role on performance.
Has a huge role. That obviously being podcast name In the Zone. Like if you want to try to be in the zone or be in that flow state and you have those things kind of restricting, it's going to keep you from performing at your best
Big
all
time,
around.
big time. Completely agree.
Awesome. So how would someone want to, I guess, if they're looking into this, maybe let's say a coach, for example, or a strength and conditioning coach, they're trying to go in and be like, hey, let's try to dive into this. What would they do? Go to the certification, or
Yeah.
how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, no, the beauty of body tempering is that it's very usable for the average athlete. You don't necessarily have to be certified in order to practice it on yourself or on a coach or on an athlete, I should say. So for coaches out there that are curious, you can use kettlebells, barbells, like you said, with your athlete with the stomach. You can use that heavy loaded pressure to get experience. So find somebody near you that may have some tempering devices if possible. There's a lot of good strength and conditioning gyms that have it. But if not, use dumbbells, barbells, kettlebells, and apply loading pressure onto the body. Obviously, work around bones, work around joints that may
Yeah,
cause
you don't do
issues.
that.
But, start with the easy area. Start with the glutes, start with the hamstrings. I mean, that's an area that most athletes are carrying tightness in anyways. And most athletes, you create even, a decent release in the hamstrings and the glutes, and you're going to see a change in how they run and how they can squat. So start small and then work into more intricate tissues after that. But if you can get some pretty good work done without necessarily finding a professional near you.
Oh yeah. Oh, and if someone, like you mentioned, I think those are perfect examples. Like go to bigger spots like glutes or quads, hamstrings are probably ones that you can touch on.
Mhm.
What are some, I guess, things, maybe just word of caution for people to be like, hey, probably steer clear away from this.
Yeah, 100%. So when you're working with the spine, you definitely want to be careful. Now, that's probably the number one thing that people, it catches their eye. It's kind of like the most popular part of body tempering is rolling over the spine.
Sure.
But that's one that you probably want to work with somebody that's a professional that's been certified in order to do so.
A lot of nerves and
A
spinal cord,
lot of, yeah,
vertebrae there. You
it's
don't
not
want to
worth
mess with.
it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then because we're using so much pressure, like anybody that has any sort of like circulatory issues, you don't really want to push any buttons with that because
Okay.
that amount of like loaded pressure, like we're having to compress a lot of blood vessels to get to the tissue like
Yeah.
we need to.
I could see how that could possibly, very seldom, but could have like a blood clot or something
It
like that. They have
can,
it.
it
Yeah.
can, yeah, yeah. It's like, and when I work with clients, I have to make sure they're not on blood thinners or anything like that,
Hmm.
because that kind of stuff can be quite contraindicative. But yeah, as long as when you're working on a tissue, you're working on soft tissue and you're not working on bone, and your brain has a strong response, it will tell you, you know, where you're working out anatomically. You're pretty safe. The body is way more resilient than we make it out to be.
No doubt. I definitely agree with that. Even as far as training is concerned, be like, hey, it's a little bit more than these 3 by 10, prescriptions that you give guys, and they're just like, hey,
Completely.
this is all you can do for today, or treating people like glass. Be like, hey, we can push this a little bit more if we
Yes.
need to.
Yeah.
Obviously, especially when you have body tempering or other
Hmm.
modalities to help with the recovery,
Yeah.
you can push it and try to get to a certain limit and see how
Yes.
far athletes can go, which is really
Completely.
cool.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And that's something that's fun about my job is I work with people from all walks of life. So I might have a baseball athlete or, you know, a power lifter, but then I might have, you know, just an HR worker that, you know,
Yeah.
sits at a desk all day and has tight traps. And it's fun because you get to like take everybody where they're at and you get to push them a little bit further. And I'm sure you
Mhm.
see that as well as a coach
Oh
too.
yeah.
Like you're having to show somebody they have that extra 5%, and I get to do it with the pressure that I'm working on that client with, which is a very
Literally
fun,
and physically.
literally and
Yeah.
physically.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's honestly a lot of fun to be able to show people how strong their bodies are and they have no idea. So yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, it's crazy. To kind of touch on that too, kind of, I guess, to not get too into the weeds, but
Hmm.
obviously I've seen a lot of tension and tightness with guys in baseball.
Definitely.
Most of them probably always have a sensitive subscap.
Hmm.
Upper trap is usually a big one too, and
Big
then
time.
pec, lats.
Hmm.
Those main four just all around the shoulder.
Yeah,
Maybe a few things going on with the forearm.
sure.
Um, But what other than, obviously we mentioned like overuse and obviously throwing a lot,
Hmm.
but what other things could contribute to some of that tightness that
Hmm.
may not be sports related, but could be training related or
Hmm.
just lifestyle in
Yeah,
general?
yeah. I find breathing to be the number one factor with all of my clients, and that definitely applies to baseball too.
Sure.
We don't realize how dysregulated as a society we've become in our breathing. Not many people have a good use of their diaphragm. They don't have a good ability to breathe through their nose. And when you look at the research of how nasal breathing, how diaphragmatic breathing affects your body, it changes everything, and especially when it comes to muscle activity. So you know, let's say you're throwing for hours on end and then you're shallow breathing through your chest. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, you know, you're already putting all of this pressure in your pec and in your trap, and then you're making it worse when you're throwing. So
Sure.
I think I find breathing meditation, anything of that sort, to be just mind blowing for athletes.
Oh yeah. And a lot of it too, I mean, see it scrolling on social media and stuff.
Hmm.
Sometimes you have like mouth breather versus a nose breather, but
That's
like
right.
it's
You made a
very
post on that
true.
recently, didn't
Yep.
you? Yeah.
Yep. It's one of those things that you do need to have
Hmm.
um, a lot more breathing through your nose because you're going to take a lot more in
Yep.
that way
Big time.
versus, you know, we see it all the time, especially with younger kids. And it's not that there's anything wrong with it. They're just
Hmm.
they're always in school sitting down and they're not
Hmm.
being very active. So then they resolve to that like mouth breathing.
Correct. Totally agree. And not only that, but I was actually listening to something recently. It was talking about how, on top of the fact that we are in these bad positions posturally all day, like
Mm,
the way that technology's affected us, it's too much for our brains to handle the majority of the
sure.
time. And because of that overuse, like we're not able to. We get more dysregulated than we even realize. And as a result, we all have that shallow breathing pattern that leads to all sorts of dysfunction, both mechanically and in terms of the tightness that we build up.
Yeah, that's
So,
it. That's it. I
yeah.
love it. Well, Lucas, got any other closing thoughts or remarks on as far
Yeah.
as what body tempering, how it can help
Yeah.
people, where they can I think we covered a lot of questions of like where they could start
Yeah.
on their own,
Uh-huh. Of
but then how to
course.
graduate to that, I think
Yeah.
or maybe even experimenting with it on their own. What
Hmm.
what are some
Yeah.
final thoughts there?
I would say just continue to push your body in terms of what it can handle. whenever I went through my story of finding body tempering, I had a bunch of lower back injuries that tempering helped to clear up. And because of tempering, I was able to push my performance so much further than I ever dreamed possible. So I would encourage people to take care of their bodies and watch their performance just skyrocket, because they have no idea what they're capable of.
100%. You only get one body, right?
No,
One thing that you can use, and
yeah,
got to make sure that you are a good steward of it, right?
completely.
Awesome. Well, where can the listeners
Yeah.
find you, and how can they get in contact?
100%. So yeah, you can find my Instagram. My company name is Trilateral Performance. So it's just direct Trilateral Performance on Instagram. I do all of my booking and website information through the Booksy app. You may have heard of it before. It's popular with like barbers and salons. But you can go on there and type in Trilateral Performance, and you can find me on there. I have 2 locations, one in Charlotte and one in Monroe. So I'm here at the Fit Methods where we're at recording right now. It's in Blakeney. The Fit Method is the name of that. And then I'm also working at No Limits Fitness in Monroe. So depending on the time of the week, you can reach out and you can find me there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Lucas, appreciate you taking the time to come out and do this, man. This is awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate it a lot, man.
Love it. And for those of you listening, stay in the zone.
Love it.